start by saying that tonight's shiur is Leilu Nishmat Avimori Dov Ber Meir Ben Ruven Halevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. And as I said, we're going to speak this week about the Meraglim. Although interestingly enough, even though I'm going to first let me get my screen share up here so you can all see what I'm talking about. Let's come on now. Let's get going. No, come on, screen share. Here we go. Okay, now you should all be able to see where we are. One of the interesting things is when we talk about parshat Shelach is we talk about the Chet HaMeraglim, and yet the word Meraglim does not appear in any shape, manner, or form in the entire parsha. And that's really what I wanted to focus on tonight is what was the mission of the people who were sent. Let's not even call them Meraglim at the present time, but these people who Moshe sent, what was their mission? What did they think their mission was, perhaps, and what happened? So I'm going to start right away with the fact that we have two different versions that seem to totally contradict each other in the Torah describing this episode. One is, of course, our parsha this week. And the second is when Moshe is reviewing these events 40 years later with the generation that's about to inherit Eretz Yisrael. So I'm going to start firstly just with our first pasuk bet right here, which Hashem says, it appears that this, from our parsha, that Hashem says to Moshe, this is something I need you to do. Shlach l'cha anashim v'yaturu et Eretz Kanana sh'ani noten livnei Yisrael. Ish echad l'matavotav tishlachu kol nasi bahem. Which, when we translate it, says, send for you men, v'yaturu. I'm going to specifically leave v'yaturu untranslated for a while. We'll get to what it means, I hope, shortly. They are going to be doing something at Eretz Canaan, which I'm giving to Bnei Yisrael, one man per tribe you should send, and they should be kol nasi. Each one should be some type of prince, some type of leader in this endeavor. Should be the people involved. I'm going to skip for a minute down to this pasuk in Devarim, where Moshe describes what happens as follows. This is Devarim Perek Aleph Pasuk Chavbet. It says, "Vatikruvun elai kulchem." All of you approached me, Vatomru, and you said, Nishlacha anashim lefanenu, let us send men in front of us. And here the phrase they use is V'yachperu lanu et haaretz. They will be chofer for us the land. We'll get to what lachpor means in a minute also, I hope. V'yashivu otanu davar, and they should return to us something. At haderach asher nalaba, the path that we should go up on, that harima and the cities which we will come to. And then Moshe describing what happens there in Devarim says, "Vayita b'nai hadavar." This sounded good. Vayakach became shnei mosar anashim. I took 12 men, ish echad lashavet, one per tribe. Vayifnu vayalu hahara. They turned and went up to the mountain. Vayavoa nachal eshkol. They came to nachal eshkol. Vayiraglu ota, and they were miragel it. So here's the first time we have this root of miraglim mentioned, is what they did. They were miragel, even though that was not what the people asked for is v'yachperu. And if we go, as I say, we go back to what Hashem tells Moshe, it's v'yaturu. So we have three different words used to describe this endeavor. Okay, so let's start with the word v'yaturu, which, by the way, you'll notice I've highlighted in green everywhere this word v'yaturu, latur, vayalu, vayaturu. Again, throughout the parasha here, they are referred to as mitur. Okay, so the question we have to understand is, what does taru mean, or latur? And I'm going to quote first from Rav Hirsch, and then I'm going to bring down the pasuk that Rav Samson Fall Hirsch quotes from as follows. Okay, he first says the following, that latur, which is related to a row, a tur, which is spelled with a tuf instead of a tet, I'm sorry, a tet instead of a tuf, whereas our Torah is spelled with a tuf, designates not only searching in general, a purely objective searching of things in general. However, it also means with this when it occurs with a subjective purpose, it seems to mean searching out the good points suitable for an intended purpose. So the purpose that Moshe wants, that Hashem wants Bnei Yisrael to be searching out, is clearly searching out Latour for the good things. And we have a similar phraseology. Rav Hirsch tells us, if we look back to last week's parsha, it says that the Aaron Berit Hashem Nosea Lifnehem. Aaron would travel during this first travel when they left Har Sinai. The Aaron traveled in front of Bnei Yisrael, Derech Shloshet Yamim, a 3-day journey, Latour Lahem Menucha, the same route to seek for them a menucha, a place that was suitable for resting. Again, Latour here clearly means searching out, looking for something that was good, a good place to camp. They didn't want to be camping where there were, all sorts of obstacles. So Latour again means to seek out something that is positive, that will benefit the seeker, the searcher. Similarly, in Kohelet, we have the same phrase, V'natati et libi, I Kohelet, he's describing what he did. Natati et libi, I set my heart, lead Rosh, to investigate V'latur b'chachma, in other words, to search out in the fields of chachma, everything that was happening under the heavens. Again, Latour, to look for the value of, to look for those good things that were positive. And this seems to be something we are supposed to be doing. That these people are assigned the job of looking for all of the good things in Eretz Yisrael to help us to make this trip more smooth and easy. That's the purpose that Hashem wants them to fulfill. I'm going to go back for a moment, and will notice again that Moshe gives them a set of three psukim that describe what Moshe asked them to look for. And that's on the, it's the right as I'm looking at it. So I don't know which way you guys see. I guess on the right side of the screen here. These three psukim, Yud Chet, Yud Tet, and Chaf, on the first side of this little chart I made here, are Moshe's charge to these men as they're leaving. He says, Uritem et haaretz mahi. You should see the land. What is it? And the people who are dwelling there, are they strong or weak? Lots or a few. And what about the land that they're dwelling in? Is it good or bad? The cities that they're dwelling in, are they living in open cities or fortified cities? And finally, he asked them, and then he asked them about the land itself. Is it fat, literally fat, or weak? In other words, is the land strong enough to support crop growth? Are there trees that grow there? And strengthen yourself, and take some of the fruit. This is the charge that Moshe gives to the men who are leaving. Now, if we are to look at these charges, and we are to look at the word taru, it seems counterintuitive to us, a lot of the things that Moshe is commanding them. First and foremost, if we are to assume, as Moshe does in Dvarim, and Moshe reviews it back, he says the purpose is v'yachperu lanu et haaretz. Now, v'yachperu comes from the word lachpor. Lachpor, we know, means to dig. So to dig, and Rav Hirsch, again, v'yachperu lanu, says the following, just to differentiate between here and between the word tor. He says, lachpor et haaretz is predominantly to be looking for the purpose of finding out the weak spots of the land for the purpose of conquering it. So lachpor, which comes from chafar, to dig into something. And Rav Hirsch says later on that this connection between this lachpor in terms of searching out the land and lachpor, to dig, he says he says he would probably, the underlying concept of the word lachpor is excavating, bringing into the light that which was probably better off remaining hidden. So when you are a reconnaissance agent for leading a military operation or preparing for a military operation, your job is to find the weak spots in the land. But that's not at all what Moshe asked them to find. He asked them to find the strengths of the land, the good things in the land, the positive things. That's why we use the word Latour. That's what Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted these people to go through the land, to see how beautiful it was, to see how special it was, and to bring that report back to Bnei Yisrael so they would be so enthusiastic about the conquest. Moshe, looking back 40 years later, says obviously that that may have been Hashem's role, but that was certainly not their intent. And he specifically says that the people asked, "V'yachparu lanu et haaretz." They should search this out as military spies, as reconnaissance agents, searching those areas that were weakest, that were least defensible, that would be easiest to penetrate. And Moshe says that what did they do? Vayiragluota. They were not tarim. They did not go as objective observers to look at things. They became meraglim. They became spies. Now the problem is, if their purpose was to be spies, then their whole mission seems very, very strange in terms of how it was carried out. Because if we look through the description of their trip to Eretz Yisrael, it doesn't look like they were trying to hide. Spies, if you are a military spy, the first thing you need is secrecy. You don't want the other side to know you're looking to collect information. And yet they go down and they publicly carry this fruit with them. Okay, it says here that they stopped at Nachal Eshkol. They took this huge cluster of grapes. We're all familiar with the Carmel wine, with the spies carrying the grapes. And Rashi says that this cluster of grapes was so huge that they had to put it on four different pole. They arranged a rectangular 4 poles, and it took 8 men to carry this one cluster of grapes. That is to show you how large the fruit was. And min harimonimu min hateinim, each rimon was so large that it took one person to carry a rimon. This wasn't like we have, you go to the store and you buy a dozen rimonim. This was the rimonim were so huge that one man was required to carry the rimon. So the produce that they were carrying seems to have been a rather heavy burden. As such, we would have expected them to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we're on a spy mission here. We don't have time to carry this out." And this is what causes Rashi to tell us that the only reason they collected the fruit was to reinforce their negative report. Show, look how large the fruit is. Imagine the people, how big they are and how strong they are that are growing this fruit. So even though Moshe does, it's interesting enough, Moshe tells them in his thing, he says, bring from the fruit. Clearly, they did not want to bring from the fruit. The only reason they brought it was because they had switched the mission. Or if they had felt that their mission was to show the beauty of the land, they might not have brought the fruit. They might have turned aside. So the problem here is that, at least from Moshe's perspective, that even though they started out as tarim, and I think a tayar, if we think about it today, a tayar is a tourist. They were going as visitors to the land. They were the princes of the land. They were not military leaders. They were political leaders they were on a fact-finding tour. It was what do we call it? A trip. It was a vacation trip where they wanted to see how nice the land was. That was Moshe. That was Hashem's perspective. Why? Because Hashem knew, or at least Hashem wanted the Bnei Yisrael to understand that the conquest of Eretz Yisrael was not intended to be a military conquest by natural force, by natural means. It was to be a clear showing that Hashem was the one who was giving us the land, and that is clear by the opening phrase here. By Hashem says to Moshe, Shelach lecha anashim v'yatur et Eretz Canaan. What is Eretz Canaan? Asher ani noten livnei Yisrael. I'm giving it to Bnei Yisrael. They do not have to conquer it. I'm giving it to Bnei Yisrael. The conquest here was intended to be of a supernatural, miraculous perspective, in which Bnei Yisrael were not necessarily going to be involved militarily. That changed because of what happened, but the original intent was that Hashem was going to give Bnei Yisrael the land, and after the inhabitants had been removed, then Bnei Yisrael would begin to build Eretz Yisrael in a natural way. But through the conquest, the miraculous nature of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, the traveling through the Midbar, was supposed to continue at least through the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. That's Hashem's plan. And that's why he says to Moshe, V'yaturu. They are going strictly to look at the land, to see how beautiful it is, to bring back that report. Now, perhaps they were misled by Moshe's instructions. Let's go to Moshe's instructions again, what he tells them. Uri'item et haaretz mahi v'et ha'ama yoshev aleha echazak hu harafeh. He's asking them whether the people are strong or weak. So by asking them this, perhaps he is misleading them into thinking that, wait a minute, we're not going as visitors to look at a land that we're going to inherit. We're going as spies to bring back military information. And perhaps that is why they ultimately mistook their mission and ultimately turned it into meraglim as opposed to tarim. Let's go to, now it's interesting because when they come back, they seem to answer Moshe's 3 comments in reverse order. Okay, the last thing, I'm going to go to the bottom of the chart because here we're going, you'll notice Psukim go Chav Zayin, Chav Tet here, that they answer him almost in reverse order of the order the questions were asked. He asks, Ma haaretz hashmeina hi'im razah, what type of crops grow there? Does it support crop growth? Does it have trees and take some of the fruit? And they said, when they first arrived, it says they say, Banu ela aretz asher shlachtanu, we've been to the land where you sent us. The gam zavat chalav udvashi, it is certainly flowing with milk and honey. So they answer his question, hashmeina hi razah, they answer that question. You asked us this, certainly it's a land flowing with milk and honey. The zepirya, and you asked us to bring the fruit, here it is, look at the size of this fruit. Then they go to the next question that Moshe asked, again in reverse order. He says, is it good or is it bad? What are the cities that they live in? And here they answer him. They say, huge, heavily fortified cities. And then they add, but that really is an answer to his first question, which is why Pasuk Chavchet appears in the first box and the second box. Because if we go to the third set of questions that Moshe asked, the people who are dwelling there, are they strong or weak? What do they answer that? They answer ki az ha'am. The people there are very, very strong. The Harib B'tzurot we talked about here, and then they add V'gam Yelidei Ha'anak Ra'inu Sham, the sons of giants we saw there. Amalek, a nation we're very familiar with. We've already had a battle with them. Yoshe Beretz HaNegev, they live in the south. Chiti, Yevusi, Amori, Yoshe Bahar, Raknani, Yoshe Al Hayam, Al Yad HaYarden. They list all of the different nations living there. And this is to give you a picture that wherever you look to go, there's nowhere easy to conquer. There are strong, powerful nations living there, no matter where you go. So that is their original report that they bring back in answer to Moshe's questions. Again, it appears that if their job was Latour, to look and only find the good things, it looked like they failed miserably in what their mission was, because all they're bringing, I take it back, their first pasuk, their first verse of the response was a very positive. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Here's the beautiful fruit. But then they begin with this word here, ephes. However, yes, you asked us to give you only the good things, but however, we got to tell you the real story, at least from our perspective. And the reason they have that perspective is because they have switched from Tarim to Meraglim, And as such, they have perhaps dismiss the fact that Hashem is going to miraculously give them land and mistakenly believe that it is now our job to shift gears from the supernatural miracles to the natural miracles. That the only way we are going to be able to conquer this land is through military conquest. Yes, Hashem will be fighting with us, perhaps, but we have to be able to do it in a natural means. And that is why they bring back this report that says, wait a minute, if we have to conquer this land naturally, there's absolutely no way it can happen. Now, what they should have said following that is what Kalev does say, and Kalev interrupts them and says, wait a minute, we certainly can, because we know the only way is if we go up, if we elevate ourselves so that Hashem will be fighting with us, then we certainly can go up. And later on, when Yoshua and Kalev answer, they specifically say, this land that Hashem gave us is very good. And if im chafetz banu Hashem, if Hashem wants to give it to us, then nothing can stop us. So again, this now becomes from a question of what is the reality to a question of where is Hashem's role in this? And that's when the people break down and lose all confidence. And ultimately, we know what happens afterwards. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this dichotomy here of between Meraglim and Tarim for another minute by focusing us on these two concepts of V'yachbru lanu and V'yiraglu ota. Interestingly enough, the only place that Meraglim, or I shouldn't say the only place, the place where Meraglim appears the most, that word appears most in the Torah, is of course in the story of Yosef and his brothers, and where Yosef accuses them of being Meraglim, and he tells us what the word Meragel means, Lirot et ervat haaretz batem, that a Meragel, a spy, what we translated spy, is somebody who comes to see the nakedness of the land. In other words, you are looking for the weak points of the land where you can come in and conquer it. That's the purpose of a Meragel, as opposed, as I said, to a Latour. And interestingly enough, later on, when Yehoshua sends his Meraglim, there's a very big difference between how Moshe sends his and how Yehoshua sends his. Very interestingly, here the word is cheresh. Okay, he sends the spies, when Yehoshua sends the spies to Yericho, which is what we read about in the Haftorah, and the purpose of the Haftorah, I think, is to contrast Yehoshua's spies with Moshe's men that he sends, because clearly Yehoshua does not send them with huge fanfare in front of a gathering of the whole people. He sends them from his own office, basically. Nobody else knows about the mission except these two men and Yehoshua. It is a secret mission, and their purpose specifically is the Chu et Haaretz et Yericho. He gives them a very definitive mission. Only go look at the Yericho, because that's where we're looking to enter the land and conquer it. However, interestingly enough, there were only two of them, and already before they had even spent a day there, quote, their cover was blown already. People already knew that these were spies. So it seems incongruous that Moshe would have sent 12 men in such a visible way if their purpose was to be Meraglim. And I think that's why we have the whole debacle of the Meraglim, is because they were not intended originally to be Meraglim. Hashem's intent was that they should be Tayarim. And when they switched and became Meraglim, the whole mission basically fell apart. And I think that's really the lesson here, that we have to understand that when we are looking at Eretz Yisrael, there are two ways we can look at it. We can be Meraglim, or we can be Tayarim. And I think the lesson, at least, that we have to understand from the parsha of the Meraglim and the parsha of the way the Torah describes it, is that our job, and I think this is true about all of life, is to be Tayarim, not necessarily Meraglim. Our job is to look at Hashem's world and look for all of the beautiful points and all of the things that will help us grow in the service of Hashem. That's what being in Eretz Yisrael is all about. That's what I think living a Torah life is all about, is being positive. There's, unfortunately, the Yiddish expression, schwer zu sein a Yid. It's hard to be a Jew. which unfortunately leads many people in many walks of Jewish life to be very pessimistic about being Jewish. Being Jewish is something we need to be optimistic about. We need to be very positive about. We need to be proud of our being Jewish. And it's only when all of Am Yisrael will feel that way about Eretz Yisrael and about the Torah that we will ultimately merit Gula Shlema B'mheira of Yameinu and undo the chet of the Meraglim. So thank you all. Questions, comments, and feedback at this point.